Welcome back in, Clay Travis, Buck Sexton show. We head up to Capitol Hill now to be joined by Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Senator, we saw the big, beautiful bill passed by one vote in the House, 215 to 214, I believe. It is now on to the United States Senate. What happens there now? What should we know about what the process is in the Senate, what you want to see?
There's some good and some bad to the bill. The good is the tax cuts. I supported these in 2017. Some of them will be making permanent, and some of them will be adding to. I'm very supportive of that. I'm supportive of spending cuts. I think the spending cuts are wimpy, anemic, and unfortunately won't do much to change the course of the country towards a more fiscally responsible path. The thing I really object to, though, and that prevents me from supporting it at this point, is that it adds either 4 or 5 trillion, depending on which version you look at, to the debt ceiling. This will be an historic increase in the debt ceiling. We've never added this much at one time. And frankly, conservatives have never voted for these things. Typically, they've been passed by Democrats, and sort of the big government Republicans are forced to get together. I always called it a day of shame. They had to go down in the well and admit that their big spending plans had caused the debt to rise alarmingly. But now it's conservatives voting for it, and my fear is that this will be the end of fiscal conservatism here and in the country, because there's very few. There were 1 or 2 in the House that opposed this because the debt rose too much. Right now it's just me in the Senate, and it's not because I oppose Donald Trump or not because I oppose the tax cuts or any of the spending cuts, but I just don't think we should be the party that raises the debt ceiling $5 trillion. Come September, the deficit this year is going to be about $2.2 trillion. That's all Republican now, because Republicans have voted for these spending levels. They're anticipating 2.8 to 3 trillion next year. That's just not conservative, and somebody's got to be left in the country who will speak truth to power, that will say, basically, we're supposed to be the conservative party.
Senator Paul, are we at a point where we just need to be honest as a country that if there is no political will to change, alter, whatever somebody wants to say about it, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, maybe really just Medicare in that equation, and defense spending is not going to get cut. If anything, it's going to go up. We're not going to tackle the debt, right? Is that mathematically what we are stuck with? Is there some other way? I just worry that this is, I remember when you came in on the Tea Party wave, we've been talking about this issue for a long time. There's a bit of fatigue over, guys, the debt bomb is ticking, and everyone goes, oh my gosh, let's do something about it. You go, okay, maybe we need to reform entitlements. They go, you're out of office.
Yeah, well, I've been pretty honest with it. Since I was elected and when I was running for office the first time, I said, Social Security's running out of money, so is Medicare, and we're living longer. We're going to have to gradually raise the age of eligibility. And I would laughingly say, people would say, do you hate old people? And I say, no, I aspire to be an old person. I'm on my way. I want to collect my Social Security, my Medicare. And so in order to save these systems, they have to be reformed. But when we take them off the table and we present deficits as big as the Biden deficits or bigger, we're just as guilty. And we no longer can point to them and say, oh, these are the Biden deficits or the Biden inflation that came from the deficits. We'll be looking in the mirror because we'll have the responsibility now. And I think there still needs to be a conservative resistance against big spending and against debt. And it is important. Our interest rate's about $1 trillion, and our interest payment's about $1 trillion a year. But interest rates are still edging up. The interest rate for 30 years at 5%. So we are gradually turning over into a higher interest rate, and it's going to crowd out all spending at some point in time. The deficit for this year will equal the budget. Congress votes on a discretionary budget of about $1.8 to $2 trillion. That's equal to the deficit, which means 100% of the budget we vote on will be borrowed this year. So this should not be about allegiance to Donald Trump. I like the president. I voted for him. I support him. And I'm with him on so many things, his cabinet, Maha movement, all that stuff. But it doesn't mean we should quit being fiscally conservative and asking the difficult questions about, are we for big debt or are we not for it? Are we different than the Democrats when it comes to deficit spending? And right now we're looking kind of like the Democrats as far as a result.
We're talking to Senator Rand Paul. I want to build on what Buck said because I do think it's interesting. The Tea Party movement started, you can correct me if I'm wrong because I may be a little bit off, but I think I'm right, when under Obama the national debt approached $10 trillion. Since that time, we have nearly quadrupled the national debt because it's rapidly approaching $40 trillion. And as you just laid out, we're headed for $50 trillion, $60 trillion. And it just feels like Buck and I talk about this sometimes on the program because we see the responses when we bring it up. You say, hey, this is unsustainable. People say, well, you should just cut costs. The problem is if you look at the basic math of what Medicare costs, of what Social Security costs, what the debt costs, and I don't think most people want to replace national defense, even though now we're spending more money servicing the debt on interest than we are in national defense. That eliminates about 86%-ish of the overall budget. Even if you cut every other part of the budget, you're still going to, as you just laid out, end up in a deficit situation. To me, the only possible solution is you have to address entitlement spending in a significant way. And you know this better than anybody. It seems like 95% of politicians just say, hey, I got to get elected in 2 years. Hey, I got to get elected in 4 years, 6 years, whatever it is. We'll just kick the can down the road and pretend that the looming debt crisis doesn't actually exist.
Well, one of the reasons we've put forward the penny plan budget to balance the budget is to illustrate that it can be done, and it can be done by cutting only a few percentage points, but you have to cut a few percentage points of everything. So when I started proposing this 10 years ago, spending wasn't nearly as bad, but it was headed in the wrong direction. 10 years ago, you could freeze spending. Don't increase spending. Spend the same amount each year for 5 years, and the budget would balance. Then a couple years later, we called it the penny plan. You had to cut 1% across the board of everything on budget to balance the budget, to balance the annual budget. Then it became the 2-penny plan. Then COVID hit, and it became the 6-penny plan. And so that's about where we are right now. You'd have to cut a 6% across the board. But I tell people, look at it this way. If you still had 94%, let's say your big deal is your mother and grandmother had Alzheimer's disease, you want the government to do research. So they come into me, they all wear purple ribbons, and I have a great deal of sympathy. I have family members who have had this, and I say to them, well, we're short of money, and you got $100 million last year. Could you live with $94 million this year? And every one of them, they're tearful, thinking about their loved ones. They're talking about something very personal to them. And they look at me and they say, well, sure, if the country's short of money, we could do with $94 million. And see, that would be the same truth of everybody. Everybody would just have to deal with $94 out of 100, and it would be less about eliminating anything to anyone, but cutting everybody to 6% and just saying, we've got to do it. You do it for a couple of years, we balance, the country begins to grow, receipts grow again, and actually government spending could gradually go up after a while. But I don't know. I'm not afraid to do it, and I don't know that I'm any less popular than I was when I ran. I got 62% of the vote last time in a state that has a significant population that's dependent on government, and I have great sympathy for them, and I want them all to do better. And I say, I don't want to cut you off Medicaid. I want to get you private health insurance with a private job and better payment. And so, I don't know. I think people do understand it if you're sincere. I think a lot of the people that are weaselly and waffly and never really commit one way or the other and then go home and tell everybody they're for a balanced budget. See, this is a problem with Republicans. They're going to lose face, and they're going to lose any semblance of sincerity because they're going to go home to the Chamber of Commerce and to the Rotary and talk about balanced budgets next year or this summer, and yet the deficit's going to be $2.2 trillion, and all of it is responsible to Republicans now. This is no longer the Biden deficit. This will be the GOP deficit, and in the next 2 years, they're going to borrow $5 trillion. Somebody's got to stand up and shout no.
Well, Senator Paul, at least down the line, if this doesn't stop, you'll be able to look at all of us when we're facing a true financial crisis and say, I did tell you guys this was coming. So I know that will be cold comfort, but you're very much on the record with this one. I worry that American politics have unfortunately gotten on this unstoppable amusement park ride, and we're going to run out of track. But anyway, I also wanted to ask you something. Well, actually, no, this is very serious, too. I was going to say go in a lighter direction, but no, not really. What you're finding about, or what we're all finding out about really the new version of how the Democrats viewed Biden during the election, this book that's come out, all of this stuff. Where do you come? I mean, as a doctor, as well as somebody who's in politics at a high level, I mean, nobody's really supposed to believe that your Democrat colleagues in the Senate didn't know Biden wasn't all there, right? Or what?
No, this is really shocking. You're going to discover, can you believe it, that Biden was actually mentally impaired and no one knew about it until Tapper wrote his book? This is just shocking. I mean, what great reporting. Tapper has revealed that President Biden was missing a step or two. No, I mean, everybody saw it from miles away, the shuffling gait, the absent stare, the, looking one way, looking for people, never really certain of where he was, and then the rambling, incoherent sentences. So, and if it were just someone you knew, you'd feel sorry for them. But if it were my loved one, I would be mad at the family for putting something like that out. I think actually one of the most insulting things was Jimmy Carter's family. As Jimmy Carter was dying and really not conscious, they rolled him out for display of the cameras after having just voted. And, it's a sad time. Look, Jimmy Carter wasn't a great president. He was a great humanitarian, I think, and not a bad person after the presidency. And he should have been remembered for that. And instead, I can't shake the image of, his mouth open, unconscious, and his idiot family parading him out there in front of cameras to say he just voted. That's kind of what they did to Biden for 4 years. And it would have been much better. And, he could have been remembered, I guess at least just for being a crook, as a vice president instead of, being a bumbling president.
Do you believe that they found out on Friday that he had stage 4 cancer?
Maybe. And I don't really fault people as much for this. If you've looked into prostate cancer, and a lot of men have looked into the pros and cons of the blood testing, it really has evolved and changed a lot. See, they used to have everybody at 40 start taking a PSA, but then they started finding elevated PSAs in people having their prostates removed, which is not a benign procedure. And it's sort of unclear whether they were early cancers that might have stayed hidden for dozens of years. And so the numbers of surgeries have skyrocketed. Then they decided after 70, you're more likely to die from something else. So they say, don't take the PSA at all. And so it's weird because we all have this mortality and I'm 71 and feel pretty healthy. I think I should get a PSA. Or I'm 82 and feel healthy. Maybe I'll get a PSA. Or maybe I'll just roll the dice. I'm getting older. I'm going to die from something. So they're difficult and personal decisions. So I don't fault him for any of that. And I think there is a chance he did know. They said he got a PSA that was probably normal back when he was 71. And it's a slow-going cancer. And there's, he's 82 or 83. And, the downside to the surgeries are a lot of different side effects from the surgeries. The surgery is not a perfect surgery by any means. And so I don't know. I guess I don't fault him because I think the decision-making process is a very personal one that a lot of men are having to go through. And really, it's not an easy one because it's not like,
could I ask you really quickly about Dr. Paul, or Senator Paul, Dr. Paul? My own father, by the way, had to go through this. So a lot of us listening, it's very personal and exactly what you're talking about. But why is this happening to so many? We're now at a point where men are being told something like 70% or 80% of them will have some form of prostate cancer. This can't be normal. Do you have any working theory as to what's going on?
It actually is kind of normal. They've done a natural study of the natural course of the disease. And when they do autopsies of men in their 70s who die for other reasons, you just die and they take 100 people who died and they look at their prostates. It is like 70% of them have cancer in the prostate, but never had any symptoms. It didn't spread anywhere in their body and they died from something else. That's why it's a difficult decision. If it were just a breast biopsy or a lumpectomy that they did to the prostate, you didn't have to worry about all the other possible problems, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But since the surgery is a pretty dramatic thing, you obviously don't want to do the surgery on people who don't need to have it.
But so 100 years ago, we think as many men were having this issue as today?
Yeah,
I'm asking honestly. I have no idea.
Yeah, probably. But 100 years ago, the average life expectancy was 45. And so because we live longer, there's going to be a lot more people with it. But it's even worse than that. They apparently have done autopsy studies of men who die in their 20s. And I've seen at least one report saying 8% of men in their 20s already have a form of prostate cancer. So that makes you wonder if it's more hyperplasia or something that's not quite cancer, and that maybe our grading system needs to be better refined to figure out when we need to do surgery and when we don't. So it is a complicated subject. And I guess I don't fault him for it because, look, He's 82, and he's had 12 years without having to deal with any of the symptoms of having the surgery. And I don't know. I don't know what would have been better. And nobody really, I don't know. There's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts about how to make the decision. The guy that invented the PSA was a chairman of the department at Stanford for many years, and he finally came to the conclusion at the end that PSA is also related to a benign enlargement of the prostate as well as cancer. And it's difficult to distinguish because men's prostate gets bigger over time, and that's why most older men have trouble with urinary symptoms. But it's not all cancer; a lot of it's benign. And because the surgery is involved, you got to decide: do I want to, do I want to watch it? Do I want to do the surgery? And it's a difficult decision for a lot of men.
Senator Paul, Dr. Paul, wearing both hats today for us. Thank you so much for coming on the show, sir.
Thank you.
Since 9/11, the Tunnel to Towers Foundation has been supporting America's greatest heroes and their families. Heroes like Mark Holbert. Mark was born into a military family. His father served for 25 years, and his grandfather fought in World War II. Mark turned his childhood dream of serving into reality when he enlisted in the United States Army. He served multiple tours, including 3 in Afghanistan. On his 4th tour, he stepped on an IED, losing both of his legs. The Tunnel to Towers Foundation provided Mark and his family with a mortgage-free smart home, which enables Mark to live more independently. Mark and so many others have paid a high price to protect our country and communities. Friends like you have helped to say thank you to Mark and so many others, not just with words, but actions. Please help more of America's heroes by supporting Tunnel to Towers. Donate $11 a month to Tunnel to Towers at T2T.org. That's T, the number 2, T.org.